This is the Atheist Guide to Spiritual Awakening. I'm your host Walter, and this episode is about gender. This discussion is based on the hermetic principles, which has one which is the principle of gender, which states that everything in this world is gendered, and that anything that we create is based on gender. That's the origin of the word gender. Gendere in Latin means to create, so it's about creation. This whole first season of the podcast is about the psychological aspects and the physical aspects of the various spiritual and religious topics, and it will be no different with the topic of gender. The hermetic principles are based on ancient religious texts and try to find the commonalities in them, and that's something I really like to explore, because it allows us to find patterns in the world that we can match to other patterns in the world, and once we understood the first pattern, it becomes way easier to reflect on the second one that we maybe know a little bit less well. So the principle of gender in the hermetic principles states that everything is in this world is gendered, and it manifests on all levels and planes of existence, as well on in the physical and the metaphysical levels. I'm very aware that it is a bit of an artificial split between the feminine and the masculine in the hermetic principles, but I still think it's worthwhile to see them both, because of the psychological aspects, the physical aspects, and, as I said, the pattern aspects. So what is the feminine or the feminine energy in the hermetic principles? The feminine energy is described as receptive, sacred, treasured, protective, maintainer of traditions, honoring priority, and nourishing what is most essential to life. That fits more or less the stereotype of what women are. But as I said, we are not discussing men and women here. We are discussing feminine and masculine principles. The masculine, on the other side, is described as penetrative, assertive, progressive, conquesting, and actively directing inherent energy towards its feminine counterpart. Obviously, since we said that gender is about creation, then there is this reproductive aspect that comes into play in this archetypal analysis of the masculine and the feminine. The way the hermetic principles analyze the interaction between the feminine and the masculine is that without the feminine, the masculine would act without restraint, order, or reason, resulting in chaos. The feminine, on the other side, without the masculine, would constantly reflect and fail to actually do anything, resulting in stagnation and complacency. So the first thing I find interesting in this way of looking at the reality or in humans is that it's the balance. We seek the balance between the feminine and the masculine energy in order to make a functional human or a functional system. If I take an example outside of the human psychology, if you would only have electrons in this world, then they would all fly apart because they will repel each other. If we would have only protons, exactly the same. So we could also look at this feminine and masculine energy as a push and a pull energy. So or the polarities of the poles in the electromagnetic force, for instance. In order to create more complex systems out of the fundamental particles, we need to put them together, and it's in the dance of attraction and repulsion that we create the next level, which is the atom, and then the next level, which is chemistry, for instance. So how does that mirror in our inner world? Well, we can look at some feminine and masculine traits that, if not balanced by the other gender, would not be completely functional. For instance, if we take the nurturing side of the feminine and don't balance it with the more defensive and aggressive side of the masculine, we would have a human being that is nurturing everyone and taking hits without thinking about it. So it's in the balance between caring and strengths, in the balance between thinking and acting, in the balance between fast decision and slow contemplation, that we find in ourselves a balance. So basically our goal as humans, in my opinion, is to try to find a balance between these masculine and feminine energies, and in that balance we would create a strong warrior, philosopher, nurturer, caring person. Whether it's a woman or a man, doesn't matter. We should both sexes should strive for that ideal balance in ourselves. Now, obviously, I can't ignore the whole gender debates that are happening in the world, because, first of all, it inspired a little bit the title of this episode, and also because I see it as an attempt at finding that balance that is, for the time being, on the path of discovery and not succeeding yet. Let's take an example that is not coming out of the trans debate or the LGBTQ plus section of the world, but let's look at politics. As most probably you understood from my previous episodes, if you listen to them, I don't think that the political parties, whether on the left or on the right, are trying to achieve anything that looks as the individual good of their citizens. It's a game of balance between getting elected and pushing agendas that are benefiting the few and not the many. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to that. It's not a general statement about politicians. But if we honestly look at the end results, I don't think that we are progressing in terms of human striving or individual happiness or freedom. Quite the opposite. So how does gender play into the political aspect? Well, you could say that the current left, which has nothing to do anymore with the historical left that was defending worker rights, is playing on certain sides, certain aspects of the feminine energy. It's playing on the nurturing, caring, compassion, empathy side of the human spirit. Now, if we look at the right, it's playing on the opposite aspect. It's playing on the masculine energy. It's playing on the let's go, let's work, let's create, let's defend ourselves, let's attack, let's go to war in the world of ideas, or in the world of real wars, so the conflicts between human tribes. For me, I think that the only way to reach some social structure that is actually productive for every human as much as possible is to find the balance here again. So the simple act of focusing political agendas on the feminine for the left and on the masculine for the right already shows us that the goal is not to find balanced solutions, but to find solutions that will oppose each other in such strong ways that they will never find a compromise. And I maybe said that in another episode, but what I see our current political system doing worldwide, as much as in my country or yours, is to try to create fake problems that find fake solutions in order to maintain the illusion that the few really important things that are decided by our politicians are actually completely hidden under the general debate of ideas that do not progress at all, in order to hide from us what the real agenda is, which is an extraction from the many into the pockets of the few. They achieve that by feeding on the fact that inside ourselves, especially when we focus a lot on these political aspects and only see two solutions for every problem. Every problem has an infinite number of solutions, but we only see two of them. Then we make sure that inside ourselves we need to ride more the masculine or the feminine side of our own personality, depending on which side we identify the most with, or which tribe we identify the most with, because it's playing also on our tribal nature, which makes us want to find home for ourselves in whatever topic we engage with. Let me take an example which I on purpose take from a segment where I don't have an extremely strong opinion, which is climate change. I don't have a strong opinion because I believe that that there is a human impact on the climate, but I don't trust the mathematical models that are used to predict the impending catastrophe that the climate change messaging is announcing us. It might be true, but I know how mathematical models work. I worked a lot into financial simulation, and I know that they're extremely sensitive to a set of hypotheses and that they can be tweaked in order to show you exactly what the one making the model wants you to hear, and not a real objective prediction of the future. So climate change is a big topic that is mostly carried by the left. It's based on future catastrophic scenario forecast, which tells us that basically the world will be burning, that the species on the earth will be decimated, that us humans will suffer the consequences, that we will have famine, and all that due to the increase of carbon in the atmosphere. So what is it playing on? It's playing on our fears, on our but that's always the case with a political message, whether from the right or from the left. But it's playing on our empathy, on our compassion for other humans, for our compassion towards the other living beings on this earth, and that's activating the feminine energy. Now, what the other side is, usually the right, is countering with, is that doing massive changes in order to protect the climate, whether they are denying or not the existence of climate change, will impact the productive force, so our ability to do, to create, to move, to expand, and to produce in such a way that it will create more human suffering than it will create good. So the right is playing on our fear that our masculine side cannot express itself, our sense of freedom, our sense of creation, of production, of being useful in the world. Now, as I said, I don't know how much climate change is, or the predictions of the climate scientists are reliable, but what I know is that there are certain number of things that seem to me quite urgent, that we very rarely discuss, or at a much lower frequency than the big topic that we simply don't seem to be able to find a solution with. There are two major things, or three major things, that I think will happen in the next 10 to 50 years. The first one is depletion of some essential resources. And I'm not talking about fossil fuels. I'm talking about metals, mostly copper and other metals that seem to be getting rarer and rarer in the mines that we have available. The second topic is exhaustion of the organic matter layer on our farming fields due to extensive industrial agriculture principles that do not allow the regeneration of the topsoil. And the third one is population collapse. Everyone is talking about an explosion of the population, while many predictions that seem to be a little bit more educated show that we are getting in most of the countries, including in the ones that are still growing in terms of population, like Africa, for instance, the natality rates are going to be below replacement rate in the next 15 years, let's say. Now, why do these three topics seem to me more urgent and more important than the bigger topic of climate change? First of all, because depletion of topsoil means famine, and much faster than what climate change will do. Exhaustion of minerals and metals in particular will mean a slowdown of our industrial progress, which I have nothing against, but it's definitely not what is sold to us in terms of the future, which is supposed to be technological, and every problem will be solved by new technological solutions, whether it's algae algae fake trees in the cities to recycle CO2, or potty trained cows. Sorry, I'm laughing. These are such stupid ideas, in my opinion. Potty trained cows to reduce ammonium emissions in the soils. This latest one was sponsored by our friends from the World Economic Forum, it seems. And the population collapse is also critical, because the only collateral we have to the debt of the nations is the taxpayer money able to pay the interest on that debt. So basically, we are the collateral to the debt. So what happens when the amount of debt doesn't change, but the collateral is reduced? I would say financial chaos. And put together with the other two topics, it can predict, some economists predict some scenarios which seem to change massively the way we see the world. In some ways, in good ways. It means the end of globalization, for instance. But this is not something that is sold to us or explained to us, or that we can hear anywhere else in the mainstream, but only on specific podcasts and interviews that, if you're lucky, you will find, but maybe you won't. I will put some links in the show notes in order to allow you to find some interesting information about these three topics. Now, why is this linked to climate change? Because actually, the solution to topsoil depletion is regenerative agriculture, and regenerative agriculture is interestingly also carbon negative. So it helps absorb carbon from the atmosphere instead of contributing to carbon emissions. The second topic about minerals will be crucial for anything EV, solar panels and others. So it could be a roadblock for electrification, if we think that electrification is helping, because we didn't solve yet how to produce clean electricity with the current investments we do in electricity production facilities. And the topic of population and economy means that our way of consuming and transporting and producing goods will completely change. So do we have an idea how that impacts our carbon footprint? But no, let's discuss instead about having carbon passports after vaccine passports, which seems such a good idea, and we trust our dear government so much to help us do that. Now let's move out from the external world and go into our internal world, and the way that our inner world interacts with the inner world of others. What kind of problems can we find in ourselves? Maybe I have a problem of violence when I'm under stress. And what does it mean? It means that when I'm afraid, I activate full-blown my masculine energy and enter into a fight and completely shut down my feminine nurturing and analytical and more introspective side, and don't apply the needed restraint. So here again, an imbalance between the feminine and the masculine results in not such a properly functional human as it could be. Another example could be that maybe my introspective and analytical feminine energy is actually going into overthinking mode. And instead of deciding at some stage to do something and go for it, I will simply procrastinate and overthink everything and not move. So I need to activate some form of masculine drive into my feminine reflection in order to unstick myself um, from the from the loop, from that overthinking mode. Or maybe another case where my introspective and self-reflective feminine side will get stuck is if I become so critical of myself that it becomes self-deprecation instead of being a critical analysis of my plans, of my ideas, of my way of looking at things. So I need to activate the masculine in order to add some trust and energy and the need to be outward going and to try my ideas in order not to get stuck in a loop of depression. Now this feminine and masculine dynamic inside can also, for instance, reflect itself in a couple. A couple is made typically, or a functional couple is made with two fully functional humans, but then when they meet in the in the little circle or in the little unit that the couple is forming, the goal is that each side can relax in the natural state of being. So maybe I need to be able to go out and chop wood because I trust my wife to take care of the kids during that time. But then maybe I will go do rough play with my kids while my wife can go out with her friends and go dance, for instance. So it's in the balance of the balance of the masculine and energy in ourselves is also driven by how we balance those energies with the other people we interact with our kids, with our partner, with our friends, with our working colleagues. And if we look at how people spend most of their energies, especially with the talks about toxic masculinity or other, how to say, not very nuanced way of looking at what humans are, we get lost in a kind of gender neutrality between men and women. And it's in the tension between the feminine and the masculine that you find the excitement and the usefulness of a couple. So again, I don't think that the push we are having right now from various sources to either be hyper masculine or to be hyper compassionate is the right direction. We need to find in ourselves the balance, and with our network of interactions with other people, the balance and of these both energies that are essential, both of them, for creating anything, for creating social change, for creating any project, for creating happy families, for creating balanced children. So any drive that we have today to say that men should be, or men, not men, but that hypermasculine men should suddenly turn into nice little puppies, or that hyperfeminine women should suddenly turn into warriors, is actually helping them to really do that. I agree. I want to be a warrior and I want to be a nurturer whenever each of these sides is needed. But it's not by bashing the heads of people in with words like toxic masculinity or hypersexual femininity or things that will progress. We will just have endless debates which pits the two sexes against each other, which prevents integration in each of the sexes of both the feminine and the masculine energy. That's at least what I'm starting to see when I'm looking at what we can all see on the internet as dynamics, or at least as amplified dynamics between men and women. And I want to finish this episode, which is dedicated to gender. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me on Twitter. You will find my Twitter link in the show notes, and or directly in the comment section. Don't hesitate. I'm always happy to engage in conversations around these topics that I find very interesting. So before ending this episode, I would like to look a little bit about how we can balance these masculine and feminine energies inside ourselves. Well, I think the first thing to do is to ignore completely this whole absurd discussion about toxic masculinity or toxic femininity that is starting to emerge also as well, and focus on ourselves and how we behave. If we think that nurturing or caring is weakness, then we should ask ourselves, why is it weak to take care of someone else? Is it because in the past when you took care about someone else you got hurt in the process because that other person used you? Maybe. But does that mean that the problem was your nurturing and caring side, or was the problem the lack of balance with your more strong and defensive and boundary setting side, which is more the masculine? So if we consider that being strong or being violent is an absolute sin, then maybe the right question to ask ourselves is, are we afraid of our strengths, or are we afraid about our lack of control? And if it's the latter, the lack of control, then maybe do some martial art, maybe do some parkour, maybe do some rough and tumble play with whomever you find that is ready to engage in these kind of things. I will also put a link about rough and tumble play that I found very interesting from the Jordan Peterson show, about how rough and tumble play enables empathy. So it's always in these inward-looking, question-asking, really honest discussion with ourselves that we find why we think what we think. And as we discussed in various episodes about healing and other topics, is that way that we can reprogram our own mind and become a bit closer to a balanced human being that balances his masculine and feminine side. So, thanks a lot for listening to this episode of the Atheist Guide to Spiritual Awakening about gender. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, activate the bell, share, and invite as many as you can of your friends to also listen to this episode. You can follow me on Twitter, the link is in the show notes, and if you want any conversation, as I said, I'm open to discussing in the comment section or on Twitter. Thanks a lot, have a nice day, talk to you soon.